Before I start my latest classic review in earnest, I just want to address one thing. In my reaction to the 14th Doctor announcement, I completely mispronounced the name, and I do apologise. The name of the latest actor's takeover as the 14th Doctor is Ncuti Gatwa. That's how to pronounce his name, and honestly I can't wait to see him in action. The Reign of Terror, the 8th and final serial of Doctor Who's first season, first broadcast in 6 parts from the 8th of August to the 12th of September 1964. It currently has 2 episodes missing, those being episodes 4 and 5 respectively, however they have been recreated in animation. The first Doctor, played by William Hartnell, is once again trying to get his companions, Ian Chesterton, played by William Russell, and Barbara Wright, played by Jacqueline Hill, back home to London with the help of his granddaughter Susan Foreman, played by Caroline Ford. However, instead of ending up in 1960s London, they instead end up in 1700s France, specifically 1794, at the height of the French Revolution, and specifically the Reign of Terror, a period of the French Revolution that ran from around about 1792 to 1794, which saw a big use in deaths of many French nobility, and specifically the invention of the guillotine and its big use. Now, while they're trying to get their bearings, the Doctor ends up being knocked out, and Ian, Susan and Barbara are taken to Paris and put in prison, as it's assumed they're members of the revolution. It's assumed that they're fraternising with nobility and they're taken away to prison. Now, when they get there, while Ian is mostly confined to a cell, Susan and Barbara are swiftly sent to the guillotine, but are eventually rescued by a group of rebels who are trying to save as many people as they can. Now, it's evidently inspired quite a lot by the work of the Scarlet Pimpernel around that time, but they do end up encountering a lot of different characters. Now, the 3 ones that are actually based on real people are Paul Barras, played by John Law, Maximilian Robespierre, played by Keith Anderson, who Robespierre was kind of like a big deal at the time of the French Revolution. In fact, he ended up sending quite a large majority of its victims to the guillotine, and he became a bit of a tyrant, that's all I'll say. And the other one who is worth mentioning is Napoleon Bonaparte, played by Tony Wall. Now, Napoleon doesn't play a huge role in it, he only really appears in the final part, but aside from him, there's also a rather devious jailer, played by Jack Cunningham, who seems to like his job of keeping the French nobility behind bars just a little too well as some of their, not revolutionaries, but rebels, kind of fighting to protect people, including Webster, played by Geoffrey Wickham, and a man who appears at first to be working with the revolutionaries, named Lemaitre, played by James Cairncross. And while he's in prison, Ian ends up seeing a member of the rebels die, and gives him a message to find a man named James Sterling. And it's ultimately a race for them to try and find out what's happening, get the right information to the right people, and get out of Paris and the French Revolution as fast as they can. And it is nice to see a purely historical story. Like, there are no aliens, there's no evil villains working from the shadows, there's no devious time. It's just the Doctor and his friends kind of living through a very dark part of history. I mean, the French Revolution, it was a particularly dark time that did see the deaths of many people. And I do think they do it particularly well here. One criticism that has come up that I do actually think does hold water as a legitimate criticism is that it was felt Susan was acting a little bit too much in the story like a damsel in distress, which yeah, I can personally see, and I do personally agree with. Now, it probably wasn't Carol Ann Ford's fault. She was probably just working off the writing that she was given. But there were one or two times when I felt that Susan, compared to Ian and Barbara, I felt Susan was a little wet. But that's just me. It was just probably the writing. I mean, when they're in prison, and throughout most of the story, she is shown to be fairly unwell. Like, she's not feeling very well, she's got a headache. And they never entirely explain why she's feeling this way. But there you go. And I will admit, there were some times when she did appear to be particularly weak, and I was just like, oh, come on, you're better than this. So, yeah, I will admit the stuff about Susan is a little bit done well. But I do also like some of the viewpoints that some of the characters have. Like, there's a group who are evidently working with the rebels, and when it's asked which side they're on, it's naturally assumed that this side, in this period of history, that there are two sides. Those working with the royalty and those working with the revolutionists. However, some of them just end up saying, well, we're not revolutionists, but we're also not nobility. We're in the middle. We just kind of want to get out of this alive. And to be honest, that's relatable. I like that. And as I said, these particular stories, like purely historical ones, would slowly get rarer and rarer as the show went on. I believe that the second Doctor's second story, The Highlanders, was the last one for a while. And it wasn't until the fifth Doctor story, Black Orchid, that we actually got another purely historical story. In fact, I don't think New Who has actually done any purely historical stories that didn't involve aliens in some form or the like. So it's really interesting to see. I do also like the atmosphere that they give this place. I mean, obviously it's in black and white, so the sets can be a little limited in how you can see them, but they do manage to provide some good atmosphere. I mean, even playing the kind of traditional French theme, you know the one I mean, but then having it go down instead of up, that works for me. That kind of shows how dark the situation has become. The animation for parts 4 and 5, I will admit, with Doctor Who animation for recreating the episodes, you've got the type that's used here, which is really photorealistic, but then it moves a little bit janky, and then you've got the newer animation style they used with stuff like the recreation of Power of the Daleks, where it moves a lot better, but it does look a little more flat. To which, I do like the photorealistic look. I like both types of animation, but there were some points here where I was just watching the animation and just like, oh, this is getting a little bit kind of janky, but I'm sure they did their best with it, and I do legitimately think this is a really good story. So, I wouldn't say it's necessarily the best of Doctor Who. I wouldn't even say it's the best of William Hartnell's one. I mean, I still think my favourite is the Dalek invasion of Earth, but The Reign of Terror, it's a great historical story, and I'm glad I watched it through. So, if you haven't yet seen The Reign of Terror for the first Doctor, I'd definitely say give it a shot. Anyway, what will be my next Doctor Who story? Well, as I said with my review of The Mind Robber, I have got a plan. But until it comes about, there's my quick review of The Reign of Terror. Anyway, see ya.